Subscribe to audio novels for more content and click on the bell icon. We hope you enjoy the video. Thank you.
Zening stood outside the conference room, anxiously looking at her watch. President Gu's schedule was full for today. In 15 minutes, he needed to be on the 12th floor to negotiate with a collaborating company. But at the moment, he was still at a meeting inside the conference room, having a heated discussion behind closed doors. Should I interrupt his meeting? Zening wondered, feeling conflicted. A week ago, she became a secretary to the Zhenfeng Group's president. At the time, she had 2 colleagues. Both were beautiful and tall women with fair complexion. Nonetheless, President Gu Saye fired one of them within a week. The other had resigned, the reason being she had to take over her family's business. Before she left the company, she generously gave all her personal belongings and snacks to Zening. Zening was originally an assistant to the 2 secretaries. But ever since the 2 left, she had to shoulder all their responsibilities. Her stress naturally was over the roof. Fortunately, she got help from her colleagues. Otherwise, she would already have gone insane. Another 10 minutes passed. Time was running out. Zening felt the urge to rush in to give a reminder when the door suddenly opened. President Gu walked out of the conference room, looking cold and austere. He was tall and slender, dressed in a neatly tailored dark suit. His whole demeanor exuded self-restraint. Even though he was an attractive man, Zening dare not look at him. She instantly walked up to him, handed over the prepared documents, and politely affirmed, "President Gu, you have 5 more minutes." He took the documents and casually flipped through them as he walked with big strides towards the elevator. Zening followed right behind. President Gu's long legs met with every one stride he took forward. She had to take 2 steps to catch up with him. That brought her mind back to her first day at work. She had worn a pair of high heels, imagining she could finally live a glamorous, white-collar dream. But when she finally got off work, she immediately went to buy a pair of flat-heeled commuter shoes. Let others worry about walking gracefully. She just wanted to save her feet. Zening was distracted for a minute and only noticed belatedly that she had fallen behind. She walked faster, trying to keep up with him. Just then, a young lady walked past them holding a stack of documents. By some stroke of fate, the young lady stumbled forwards and lost her balance. Her papers flew all over the place like snowflakes. Gu did not stop for even a second. The young lady was left panicking. She was immediately on her knees picking up the papers herself. Without a doubt, this lady wasn't the heroine in the story. Although Zening wanted to help a fellow co-worker, she was pressed for time. She excused herself and hurried to the elevator just in time to press the button. As a secretary, she must have the foresight to anticipate the president's next move. They stepped into the elevator together. In a few moments, they arrived at the 12th floor just in time for the meeting. She finally felt relieved. Zheng Wen'ang walked out of the conference room, greeting them. "Miss He, go back to your office. I will call you later," he said. "All right," she nodded. "Thank you, Special Assistant Zheng. Please excuse me." Zheng Wen'ang was the president's sidekick. Thus they called him Special Assistant Zheng. He was 1 level above the president's executive assistant. Zheng had special executive authority which enabled him to represent the president in making policy decisions. Unlike executive assistants, whose focus was to oversee the president's activities, Zheng's focus was on managing the company. In comparison, Zening was just a runner. With no technical background, she had to take on any miscellaneous duties. And because of the long hours and workload, at one point, there were more than 3 secretaries with rotating shifts. When she got back to her desk, she took out the calendar and confirmed the president's schedule for the rest of the day. After that, she glanced at the computer. Today was April 16th. It's the 10th day of her arrival. Never in her wildest dreams did she think this would ever happen to her. Before transmigrating into this world, she was devotedly working on her research project. When she woke up, she was stunned to realize she wasn't herself anymore. The person looking back at the mirror looked different, but she had the same name as her. On that same day, she got a letter from Zhenfeng Group. She would start her secretariat job in 3 days. When she saw the name Zhenfeng Group, she thought it sounded familiar, almost as if she had heard of this company before. Only when she arrived at the company and personally met with President Gu was she convinced that not only did she transmigrate into another world, but she did into a novel world. After all, in real life, how often do you meet a company president who's rich and handsome like a celebrity? His surname is one of the common surnames used in novels. Not only does his name sound familiar, the background was also an alternative world. The city she was living in is called City A in the Hua country. Zening was certain of her assessment. This was not just a simple novel. This was a novel centered on the life of a president of a company. Zening had read a total of between 300 to 500 novels of the same genre. Thus, she was currently in a dilemma trying to recall which novel had a male lead called Gu Saye. Is he the main character from President Gu's Guide to Courting a Wife, Mrs. Gu, Your Vest is Off Again, or was it The Frosty President Gu's Petite Wife? But even after days, Zening still did not have the answer. It didn't help that the male protagonists in novels frequently had the surnames Gu, Lu, Shen, and Fu, and the first names frequently used are usually combinations of Chen, Ye, Cheng, and Mo. Her memory was confused after reading too many novels. After 1 week in the office, Zening felt that President Gu had indeed the distinctive qualities of a president and a male protagonist. He was handsome, rich, and capable, and had a good family background. Beyond that, he was composed, regarded others with a certain aloofness, especially females. The first day she was at work, she overheard President Gu telling the secretary who quit to use less perfume. Since that day, Zening had put away all her perfume. She also noticed another small detail. President Gu disliked taking things directly handed over to him by his secretaries. He only picked up an item after it was laid down on his table. This peculiar behavior puzzled Zening. She couldn't help but feel like he had a problem. It was common for a rich, cold president in a novel to have undisclosed problems, perhaps troubled past, or aversion to physical intimacy. She felt that Gu belonged to the last category. Of course, there was no way for her to verify her suspicions. She was more concerned about keeping her job. Despite being a novel world, realistically speaking, she would get into financial trouble without this job. The Zening she had transmigrated into had a simple background. Her parents died when she was young, and thus she was raised by her grandparents. Sadly, her grandparents passed away while she was in college. She was only able to graduate with the money they left her. After that, she worked in another company for 2 years before she job-hopped to Zhenfeng Group. Frankly speaking, she did not know how she made it through the interview. Shouldn't they have hired someone with better credentials? But on second thought, maybe the story did not require logical and meticulous personnel. Zening had decided to become serious in her job because Zhenfeng's pay and benefits were above industrial average. She would set a standard of excellence, a code of conduct for herself. Whether or not this was a novel had no bearing on her decision. If she could work while watching the story unfold, that would be a bonus. Anyhow, the main characters are usually the ones who have the drama. Spectators are hardly affected unless they intentionally cause trouble. She should be safe. Other than work, Zening was looking forward to the appearance of the heroine and how it would change the workaholic President Gu. If he was not in the office, he was on the road. That man had no private life or activities outside his company responsibilities. His hectic lifestyle prevented him from meeting potential partners. Because of that, there were many female employees in the office who had set their sights on him. For example, one of the secretaries that had just left was from a wealthy family who owned a business. She didn't even need this job. She would dress up daily to work, hoping to draw his attention, but he was unmoved. Eventually, she gave up and left. As for the other secretary fired by Gu, Zening had no idea what happened. Zening was not drop-dead gorgeous, but she was still attractive. She just needed to dress up a bit, but for practical reasons, she never did. Her casual appearance must be the reason why her female colleagues are friendly to her when they are naturally hostile to each other. Was it because they perceived her as less of a threat? Now that both secretaries had left, Zening's other female colleagues were eagerly attentive to her, perhaps because they would like the opportunity to fill these positions. Little did they know, she had no say whatsoever in the hiring process. The Human Resources Department and Special Assistant Zheng made all the hiring decisions. Thus, she played dumb to avoid discussing this subject in front of her colleagues. After 40 minutes in the office, she got a call from Special Assistant Zheng informing her that the meeting was almost over. She immediately stood up, got the documents ready, and headed downstairs. Zheng Wenang was waiting for her outside the conference room. He was around 27 or 28 years old and had graduated from a prestigious university. Moreover, he was good-looking, mature, and dependable. She thought he fits all the qualities of a male protagonist, but in this story he was merely another employee like her. "Miss He, you are here. The meeting is almost over," he said. Zening nodded. "Okay. You just started, but we have already kept you quite busy. It must be difficult for you." She was supposed to wait outside the conference room while the meeting was in progress, but Zheng had let her take a break, considering how busy she had been. "But President Gu is fair," he continued. "Since you have been so busy, I am sure he will reward you with a bonus." Hearing the word bonus, Zening could not help but laugh. "Where else can you find such a good boss?" "That would be wonderful," she said. Special Assistant Zheng also laughed. He was fond of this young secretary. She was carefree, straightforward, and approachable. "Don't worry. You won't be busy for too long since there's a new hire. I heard she is well qualified." "That's very good news." Hearing this, Zening immediately perked up. Could this new secretary be the heroine? The next day, the personnel department notified her through email of the new secretary's arrival. She was nothing short of excited. Outside President Gu's office, 3 L-shaped office tables for the secretaries were set a few meters apart. In the spacious office, it could be quite liberating, as well as lonely. She used to listen to the 2 secretaries chat about interesting gossip. Zening could only wonder what kind of person would show up tomorrow. Special Assistant Zheng must have participated in the interview. "Should I try to pry for information?" she thought. But as soon as it came, she dismissed it. She had just started working not long ago. It would be better not to pry. Not long after, the internal phone from the front desk rang. The receptionist informed her that a certain Fu Xiao had stepped into the elevator before hanging up. Zening was left bewildered. "Fu Xiao? Who is this Fu Xiao?" Ordinarily, anyone who wants to meet with President Gu must first set an appointment. All appointments are naturally compiled and handled by the secretary. It was unheard of where someone had barged in without an appointment, until today. But with the last name Fu, Zening guessed that he must play an important role in this story. Still, she was curious. She immediately went to Special Assistant Zheng's office to get information. Special Assistant Zheng was hunched over a bunch of papers. She approached him carefully. "Special Assistant Zheng, the front desk says Fu Xiao has arrived. Do you have any idea who he is?" she asked. "Fu Xiao is President Gu's best friend," he replied, lifting his head. "Let President Gu know Fu Xiao has arrived. There is nothing more you need to know." Perhaps thinking more, he added, "Fu Xiao has a bad temper. Be courteous." "Ah, that makes sense," Zening thought, nodding at Zheng. "Understood, thank you, Special Assistant Zheng." Zening went back to her office space. First, she made a call to President Gu, and then sat there trying to digest what she had learned today. This was a typical setting in a novel, where 2 close friends are at the peak and could do anything they want. This Fu Xiao might be the male lead sidekick who makes things happen, or a possible confidant of the heroine in the future. Zening was hoping it wasn't the second one. It was a waste to see friendships broken over another person. Anyway, she was clueless about the plot, but she deliberated that he is probably an important character in the story. Therefore, she must build a good relationship with him. After a few minutes, footsteps sounded from the hallway through the gap of the door. Zening immediately perked up, sat straight, and donned a professional smile on her face. A man dressed in casual wear walked inside. Immediately, his scrunched-up brows and serious look caught Zening's attention. Besides that, he was a big, tall man and was quite handsome. Zening calmly and politely greeted him. "How are you, Fu Xiao?" He slightly nodded without even looking in her direction and asked, "Is Gu here?" She nodded. "Yes, I have already informed President Gu you are here," she replied. Without another word, Fu Xiao headed towards the door. He skipped knocking and casually pushed the door open. From his actions alone, Zening confirmed that Fu Xiao and Gu Sai did have a close relationship. Now that the event was done, Zening did not waste another minute. She started clearing the documents on her desk. Although a secretary's job does not require much technical knowledge, it is very detail-oriented. She must familiarize herself with a lot of information, such as the company's rules and regulations and the organization's structure. She can't absorb information in such a short time. So, from time to time, she reads the company's system documentation. In novels, the plots usually utilize male secretaries. Female secretaries would usually be written as antagonists to make the female lead jealous, or merely as a sort of aesthetic backdrop. Only when Zening became a secretary did she realize it wasn't an easy job as novels portray it to be. Fortunately, President Gu was a workaholic without much activity in his outside life, therefore hasn't been asked to do things outside her workplace. After a while, the door opened and Fu Xiao walked out of the office. "Fu Xiao, stay safe," she courteously greeted him. He responded by turning his head and looking at her. Contrary to her expectation, his gaze was sharp like a knife, stabbing through her insides. Zening was flabbergasted. She only said 2 words out of formality. "What's this guy's problem?" Luckily, he only looked at her once, and after that he turned his head and walked out the door. Zening could finally exhale a breath of relief. He wasn't a simple man, but someone who exuded danger. It was better to give up thoughts of building a good relationship with him. The internal phone rang. She saw it was President Gu and immediately picked up the phone. "President Gu," she said. "Come in for a minute," he replied. "Okay." After Zening hung up the phone, she went straight into his office. Other than his desk, President Gu's office has a set of sofas and even a bathroom. But compared to other novels, this was already a kind of low-key setup. She walked to the front of his desk. "President Gu, you were looking for me?" Gu Xie raised his head, looked at her as if trying to ascertain something, then resumed looking at his documents. "You will accompany me to the Saturday night dinner." Zening was stunned. What did she just hear? And what did President Gu mean by accompanying him? What kind of plot was this? Did she underestimate herself, and it turns out she's the heroine in the story? Don't be silly. No heroine works non-stop for a whole week. She chastised herself. While she was still ruminating what to say, Gu Xie looked at her, taking her silence as rejection. "Do you have another arrangement?" he said. His firm tone didn't imply that he was asking for permission. Zening felt slightly frustrated. A secretary truly has no human rights. "Not really. I have just never attended such an event. I'm afraid I might be an embarrassment," she bluntly said, hoping that would detract him. "It's not important. You just need to show up," President Gu said. "You will be reimbursed for the clothing and styling expenses." She has a company card she uses daily for Gu Xie's expenditures. Every month, a detailed budget report must be submitted to President Gu. It was easy to swipe the card, but keeping detailed accounting was a hassle. President Gu, there are many colleagues. President Gu gave her a look, and she immediately clamped her mouth shut. She nodded. "If there's nothing else, I'll be back in my office," she said. Saturday night was the Foundation organization's annual dinner, where many prominent people gathered. It wasn't that she was uninterested, she was just a bit intimidated by such a formal event. Moreover, she had to wear high heels and dress in a gown. Just the thought of it made her feel uncomfortable. Zening sighed. She thought she could stay home, order takeout, and watch a movie. It just so happened that Special Assistant Zheng walked inside to have a document signed by President Gu. When he saw Zening's tortured face, he asked, "What happened to you?" Special Assistant Zheng, as if seeing a savior, Zening explained, "President Gu wants me to accompany him to the weekend dinner." Special Assistant Zheng was not surprised. He merely smiled. "That is good news. Why aren't you willing?" he asked curiously. "Oh, this? Wouldn't the president find a suitable companion to this type of event?" "I thought I could rest this weekend," she said. "I see. You have only been in this company for a short time, but President Gu usually brings the secretary to this type of event. In the previous dinners, he chose Millie." Zening tried to remember. Millie was the secretary he fired last week. In that case, Zening suddenly thought of the newcomer tomorrow. She felt hopeful. There's a new secretary tomorrow. Can we let her accompany President Gu to dinner instead? She asked. I can't make this decision. Only President Gu does, he replied. Special Assistant Zheng looked at Zening, puzzled. Zening responded with a straight face. If I must choose between lounging on the sofa in a loose dress while eating takeout with Coke and watching movies versus wearing high heels, a gown, and fakely mingling with strangers the whole night, I would choose the former. Not to mention, Millie was pretty, tall, and had a good figure. She gestured to herself. Who am I to compare? Special Assistant Zheng couldn't help but laugh. Attending a formal event is nothing to fear. If you absolutely don't want to go, just wait for the newcomer tomorrow, he said, much to Zening's comfort. Then I'll wait. The rest of the day, Zening silently prayed, hoping her new colleague would save her from this dinner. The next morning, she went to the office early. She first turned on President Gu's air conditioner, cleaned his desk, and changed the coffee machine's filter. After her tasks were done, she went back to her desk and waited for the new secretary's arrival. Zhen Feng's operational hours are from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., with 2 hours of break time in between. Meanwhile, the president's hours are flexible. At 8:15, Zening heard the elevator ding. The clack of high heels on tiles followed. The personnel brought in a beautiful, sexy lady with gorgeous, wavy hair. From the moment she stepped in, Zening was involuntarily drawn to her. How could someone be so full of charm? Secretary He, this is the new president's secretary. The human resources personnel introduced her to Zening. Zening nodded. All right, leave it to me. After sharing a few words of greeting with each other, the human resource personnel left. Zening smiled and greeted the newcomer warmly. How are you? My name is Zening. What's your name? She asked. The lady smiled back in return. She looked like she was somebody easy to get along with. Secretary He, my name is Gao Shui, but you can call me Shelley, she answered. Zening was suddenly alert. This does not sound like the name of a heroine. It was more like a secretary's name. This can't be right. Could Shelley be the real secretary of the president, and I am the heroine in this story? However, reality came like a quick slap. Shelley entered the company at 8:15 a.m., and by 9:10 a.m., she was already having a fight with Gu Xie. She didn't even last an hour. The cause of the conflict was also quite akin to a TV drama. When Gu Xie entered the office at 9 o'clock, Zening hurriedly handed over the documents that were needed to be signed and reviewed. She also introduced the new secretary to Gu Xie. In the end, Gu Xie only glanced at her and nodded, indicating that he took note of it. Zening thought nothing of it, as he did the same thing to her when she first joined the company. But Shelley unexpectedly found offense, and she replied to Gu Xie aggressively. It all happened so suddenly that Zening couldn't even remember what Shelley specifically said. But the gist of it was, for a company president, Gu Xie was too arrogant to his own employees. He didn't even bother to greet them. He was too disrespectful to others. Shelley's tone and aura made Zening remember a classic line from the TV series Meteor Shower. It was something in the lines, "My name is not Hey, it's Chu Yu-sun." But this might be too cliché, right? Gu Xie wouldn't get this, would he? No way. Contrary to her thoughts, Gu Xie didn't lash out after hearing this. He merely went back to his office in silence. Zening began to doubt herself. This was a popular thing about 15 years ago. If readers nowadays see the heroine being so irrational, but the male lead still falls in love with her like an idiot, wouldn't they criticize? As expected, Gu Xie didn't let her down. It didn't take long before she saw an officer running towards them with a pale face. He politely said a few words to Shelley and took her away. Somewhere in her mind, she already felt that she might not be able to see her in Zhen Feng again. A colleague, gone in a matter of seconds. The plan of having her as her replacement was also ruined. After a while, Assistant Zheng came in with the documents and was stunned when he saw the two empty desks opposite Zening. "Didn't you say that a new colleague is reporting today?" he asked. "She came. Then she was taken away by the Human Resource Department," she said. Zening finally met someone she could grumble to. She shared the incident with Assistant Zheng. After she finished speaking, she saw Assistant Zheng show an expression like it was no big deal. Assistant Zheng, why don't you seem surprised at all? She asked. Really? Assistant Zheng touched his nose and helplessly replied, Is it strange to say that something happens every time we recruit a secretary for the president? Do you know how often the staff change for your position? I can probably guess it. She witnessed the fall of 3 warriors consequently with her own eyes. Not to mention the sisters who sacrificed themselves in order for the male protagonist to become allergic to women. Xiaohei, I think highly of you. You must persevere and work hard for a few more years. Assistant Zheng continued. Zening replied confidently, You can rest assured. I swear to serve Zhenfeng to death. Nothing can separate me and Zhenfeng. Your fighting spirit is good. Keep it up. Then he said, I'll have to stop chatting with you for now. I need to seek Mr. Gu's opinion on something. I'll go first. Sure, please go ahead. Zening watched Assistant Zheng enter the office, went back to looking at the schedule on the computer, and sighed helplessly. It was already Thursday. There were only 2 days left. She could only go by herself if she couldn't find a replacement. She also followed up on Shelley and called the Human Resource Department. The department had an interview with Shelley and proposed a job change, but Shelley did not agree. She even quit on the same day. Simply put, they failed to recruit a new employee. In the blink of an eye, it was already Friday, and there was not much work to do. Zening could have left work on time, but just when she was about to leave, Guxie asked her if she knew how to drive. She replied honestly that she knew. Hence, one more task was added to her Friday schedule. It was to drive Guxie to Isabella. Isabella is the most famous bar in City A. She often heard colleagues discussing it in the company. She never thought that Guxie would go to a bar. After all, the CEO, male protagonists in novels were all good boys before they met the female lead. They didn't go to places where they could fool around with the opposite sex. When a place like a bar was mentioned, Zening always felt that something terrible would happen. Originally, Guxie had a full-time driver, but the driver was on leave today. Assistant Zheng picked him up for work in the morning, but he out on a business trip in the afternoon. She was the only one left for the task. After work, she went to the underground garage with Guxie. Guxie's car was a black sedan. She didn't recognize the car's logo, but judging from the interior of the car, it was definitely expensive. Fortunately, she was not a novice driver. She obtained her driver's license when she was in college. When she had a job, she often drove her company's car for work. Although she was not as knowledgeable as a full-time driver, she didn't find it too difficult. With the help of car navigation, she quickly drove to Isabella's parking lot. Isabella was gorgeously decorated and had a pretty modern design. There were 2 waiters in suits standing at the entrance. Although it was still early, there were many people lining up at the entrance. After parking the car, Zening asked, Mr. Gu, shall I wait for you here? In fact, she wanted to know if she could already go home. But Guxie unexpectedly said, Let's go in together. We'll leave after a while.